In 1965, the United States built more cars than every other country on Earth combined. Detroit was the center of the industrial world. Factories stretched for miles along the River Rouge. Hundreds of thousands of workers punched in every morning, built cars with their hands, and went home to houses they owned in neighborhoods they could afford. A job on the assembly line wasn't just a job. It was a ticket to the middle class. American cars were everywhere. Chevrolets, Fords, Chryslers, Cadillacs, rolling off the line by the millions. Made in America wasn't a slogan, it was the default. Today, the picture looks completely different. Detroit has half the population it did in the 1960s. Many of those massive factories are gone, torn down, or sitting empty. And the cars Americans drive? A huge number of them are designed, engineered, or assembled in Japan, South Korea, Germany, or Mexico. How did the country that invented the modern automobile lose its grip on the industry it created? To understand what went wrong, you first have to understand how dominant America was. In the 1960s, the Big Three, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, controlled about 90% of the American car market. 90%. If you bought a car in America, it was almost certainly built by one of those three companies, in an American factory by an American worker. And those workers were doing well. A union assembly line job at a GM plant paid enough to buy a house, raise a family, and send kids to college. The United Auto Workers Union had negotiated wages, benefits, and pensions that made factory work one of the best blue-collar careers in the country. Detroit was the engine of it all. In 1960, it was the fourth largest city in America. Neighborhoods were thriving, schools were funded, main streets were busy. The auto industry didn't just employ factory workers, it supported steel mills, glass factories, rubber plants, parts suppliers, barbershops, and everything in between. The cars themselves were big, bold, and powerful. Muscle cars like the Ford Mustang, Chevy Camaro, and Dodge Charger defined the era. Roads were wide, and American automakers didn't worry about competition because there wasn't any. European cars were seen as tiny and unreliable. Japanese cars barely existed on American roads. The Big Three had the market locked up, and they acted like it would last forever. The first crack in the armor came in 1973, when Arab oil-producing nations cut off oil exports to the United States. Gas prices tripled almost overnight. Suddenly, those big, beautiful American cars that got 10 miles to the gallon were a liability. Americans lined up at gas stations for hours. Some stations ran out of fuel entirely. For the first time, people started asking a question the Big Three hadn't prepared for. Why can't I buy a car that doesn't guzzle so much gas? The answer, for a lot of people, was Japanese cars. Toyota and Datsun had been quietly selling small, fuel-efficient cars in the U.S. since the 1960s, but they were seen as cheap alternatives. After the oil crisis, they suddenly looked smart. A Toyota Corolla got 30 miles to the gallon. A Chevy Impala got 12. When gas went from 36 cents to over $1, that difference mattered. American automakers were caught flat-footed. Their factories were set up to build big cars. Their engineers were focused on horsepower, not fuel economy. And their executives believed the oil crisis was temporary, that Americans would go right back to buying big. Some did, but many didn't. And the Japanese automakers who had been waiting on the sidelines now had a foothold in the American market. A second oil crisis hit in 1979, and it pushed even more buyers toward imports. By the end of the decade, Japanese cars had gone from a curiosity to a serious competitive threat. The era of unchallenged American dominance was over. The 1980s were brutal for American automakers. Japanese companies weren't just making small, fuel-efficient cars anymore. They were making better cars. Honda introduced the Accord, which became one of the best-selling cars in America. Toyota launched the Camry, which became a symbol of reliability. These cars didn't break down as often, lasted longer, and cost less to maintain. American cars had developed a reputation for poor quality. Doors that didn't fit right, engines that leaked oil after 50,000 miles, electrical problems, paint that faded. The phrase, "built like a Toyota," became a compliment. Built like a Chevy did not. American companies tried to respond. Chrysler nearly went bankrupt in 1980 and had to be bailed out by the federal government. Ford cut tens of thousands of jobs. GM launched Saturn, a new brand designed to compete directly with Japanese imports. None of it was enough to close the quality gap. Then the Japanese automakers did something even bolder. They started building factories in the United States. Toyota opened a plant in Kentucky. Honda opened one in Ohio. Nissan went to Tennessee. They were building cars on American soil with American workers, and the cars were still better. That was a devastating blow to the narrative that the problem was foreign labor or foreign factories. The problem was management, engineering, and a decades-long failure to prioritize quality. By the end of the 1990s, Japanese and European brands controlled about 40% of the American car market. The Big Three's share had shrunk from 90% to around 60%, and every percentage point they lost meant fewer shifts, fewer workers, and fewer paychecks. The 2000s accelerated everything that had been building for decades. American automakers were losing market share, but they were also losing money. GM, Ford, and Chrysler had massive legacy costs. Pensions and healthcare benefits promised to hundreds of thousands of retired workers. Those obligations weighed on the companies like an anchor. At the same time, globalization was reshaping the industry. Car companies, American and foreign alike, started moving production to Mexico, where labor was cheaper. Parts manufacturing shifted to China, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. A single car might have an engine from one country, a transmission from another, and electronics from a third. Factory closures hit the Midwest like a slow-motion earthquake. Between 2000 and 2008, the American auto industry lost roughly 400,000 manufacturing jobs. Plants in Flint, Pontiac, Janesville, and dozens of other towns shut down for good. The human cost was enormous. These weren't just jobs. They were the economic foundation of entire communities. When a plant closed, the ripple effects hit every business in town. The hardware store lost customers. The diner lost regulars. The school lost tax revenue. Property values collapsed. Detroit became the poster child. Whole neighborhoods emptied out. Abandoned houses dotted the landscape. The city that had built the middle class was watching it disappear. Then came 2008, and the American auto industry almost died. The financial crisis crushed consumer spending, and the Big Three, already weakened by years of losses, ran out of money. GM and Chrysler went to Congress and begged for a bailout. The scenes were unforgettable. The CEOs of America's biggest car companies flew to Washington on private jets to ask for taxpayer money. The optics were terrible, but the math was real. If GM collapsed, an estimated 3 million jobs connected to the company would vanish. In the end, the government stepped in. GM and Chrysler received roughly $80 billion in federal bailout funds. Both companies went through bankruptcy. GM wiped out shareholders, closed more than a dozen factories, and eliminated several brands including Pontiac, Saturn, and Hummer. Ford managed to avoid a bailout by mortgaging nearly everything it owned, including its own logo. But it too cut thousands of jobs and closed plants. The auto bailout saved the industry from complete collapse, but it also forced a painful reckoning. The American auto industry that survived 2008 was smaller, leaner, and permanently changed. So where does the American auto industry stand now? The good news is that it's still here. The U.S. still produces about 10 million vehicles a year. Ford, GM, and Stellantis, the company formed from the merger of Chrysler and Peugeot, still employ hundreds of thousands of American workers. But the industry looks nothing like it did in the 1960s. Auto manufacturing employment in the U.S. sits at just under 1 million workers, down from over 1.3 million in the early 2000s. In 2025 alone, the sector shed roughly 29,000 more jobs as companies shifted toward automation and electric vehicles. The geographic center of the industry has shifted too. While Michigan still leads with about 164,000 auto jobs, many of the growth areas are now in the South: Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina. And many of those southern plants are owned by foreign companies. Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, BMW, and Mercedes all build cars in the United States, but the profits flow to Japan, South Korea, and Germany. The biggest transformation happening right now is the shift to electric vehicles. Tesla built an entirely new American car company from scratch and became the world's most valuable automaker. Traditional companies are spending billions to catch up. New battery plants are being built in Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. But the EV transition also means fewer parts, fewer assembly steps, and potentially fewer workers per car. An electric motor has about 20 moving parts. A gasoline engine has over 2,000. The cars of the future may be built in America, but they may not need as many Americans to build them. And the global supply chain means that even American cars are only partly American. A car assembled in Michigan might have a battery from South Korea, semiconductors from Taiwan, and interior parts from Mexico. The idea of a fully made-in-America car barely exists anymore. Here's what stays with me about this story. In the 1960s, the American auto industry did something remarkable. It created one of the largest middle classes the world had ever seen. Factory workers with no college degree could earn a wage that bought a home, funded a retirement, and gave their children a better life. An entire economy was built on the idea that making things in America could support an American way of life. That system didn't collapse overnight. It eroded slowly, through complacency, through foreign competition, through cost-cutting, through globalization, and through decisions made in boardrooms that prioritized short-term profits over long-term strength. The industry survived, but the communities that depended on it often didn't. And the kind of jobs that once defined the middle class, good wages, union benefits, lifetime stability, are harder to find today than they were 50 years ago. America didn't stop making cars, but it stopped making them the way it used to. And for millions of workers and families, that change wasn't just economic, it was personal. If you found this interesting, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more videos on how life in America has changed over time.